On a humid evening in late September, just outside Nagoya, I stood in a small garage watching an engine with over 250,000 kilometers idle, smoother than cars half its age. No additives, no sprays, no chemical cleaning of any kind. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about carbon buildup fell apart. Today, I am revealing the Japanese carbon removal method that uses zero chemicals and why it keeps engines clean while others quietly lose performance year after year. What followed completely reframed how I think about engine longevity. When the mechanic explained their approach, there was no dramatic reveal, no secret bottle, no hidden machine, no aggressive procedure. Instead, there was a quiet confidence rooted in physics, not products. In Japan, carbon buildup is not treated as a failure that needs to be fixed. It is treated as a predictable byproduct that must be managed before it hardens into a problem. Carbon buildup is one of the most misunderstood enemies inside modern engines. Most drivers imagine it as grime that needs to be dissolved, scraped, or blasted away. That belief fuels an entire industry of sprays, flushes, and chemical services promising instant results. But carbon is not dirt. It is cooked fuel residue. It forms when combustion is not perfectly complete, when engines do not reach stable temperature often enough, and when heat cycles repeat without the conditions needed to finish the burn. Here is the crucial part most people miss. Carbon forms slowly, layer by layer. Microscopic deposits build up over tens of thousands of miles. It does not suddenly appear, and it does not require violence to be removed. In Japan, mechanics do not wait for carbon to announce itself with symptoms. They assume it is always trying to form. That assumption changes everything. Instead of reacting with chemicals after performance drops, they design driving habits that prevent deposits from ever becoming destructive. That night near Nagoya, what shocked me was not just the absence of additives. It was how normal that absence felt to them. No fear, no urgency, no upsell. They expected engines to stay clean internally because their routine never allowed carbon to mature. The car was not special, the method was. Modern engines are especially vulnerable to carbon buildup. Direct injection means fuel no longer washes intake valves clean. EGR systems intentionally route exhaust back into the intake, increasing soot exposure. Low-tension piston rings reduce friction but allow more blow-by. Short trips prevent oil and combustion temperatures from stabilizing. Each of these features improves efficiency or emissions on paper, but together they create a perfect environment for carbon to accumulate. Outside Japan, the response is almost always reactive. Wait for rough idle, wait for hesitation, wait for oil consumption, then clean aggressively and hope for the best. In Japan, the response is proactive. Never let carbon experience the conditions it needs to harden. The key insight is deceptively simple. Carbon burns. It doesn't dissolve easily, but it oxidizes extremely well when temperature, airflow, and time align correctly. The Japanese method doesn't attack carbon. It starves it of opportunity. Soft deposits are gradually oxidized away during normal driving, long before they can trap heat, disrupt airflow, or interfere with sealing surfaces. This is why the results don't feel dramatic. There is no sudden power spike, no instant transformation. Instead, something more subtle happens. Engines don't decline. Throttle response stays consistent year after year. Idle remains calm. Oil consumption doesn't creep upward. The engine never enters the slow slide most drivers accept as normal aging. Back home, people often say it still runs fine for its age. In Japan, that phrase does not land the same way. Engines don't have to feel worse just because time passes. They feel worse when combustion quality degrades, when carbon traps heat, when piston rings start sticking, when valves stop sealing perfectly. None of that is inevitable. The mechanic never revved the engine hard. He never stressed it. He described a routine built around patience. Full warm-ups, sustained mid-RPM driving, steady load, and consistency. Carbon isn't removed by force. It's removed by time spent in the right thermal window. Too cold and nothing happens. Too hot and you risk damage. There is a narrow band where oxidation occurs safely, and Japanese drivers operate in that band far more often than most people realize. Standing there, it became obvious why this method isn't popular elsewhere. There is nothing to sell, no bottle, no service package, no dramatic before and after. It requires understanding and discipline, not money. And because it works slowly, people who try it once and expect instant results assume it failed. But engines don't care about excitement. They care about heat, airflow, and chemistry over time. And this is where curiosity should start to build. Because if carbon can be reduced without chemicals, if engines can stay clean internally through driving habits alone, then the real question isn't whether this method works. It is how to apply it correctly, how often it needs to be done, and why doing it wrong can actually make carbon problems worse. That's what we need to talk about next. To understand why Japan's carbon removal method works without a single chemical, you have to stop thinking about carbon as dirt and start thinking about it as a phase change problem. Carbon buildup is not something that appears suddenly or behaves the same at every stage. It evolves. When it first forms, it is soft, almost waxy. At that stage, it has not bonded strongly to metal surfaces yet. But given enough time, heat cycling, and incomplete combustion, that soft residue polymerizes, hardens, and turns into the stubborn carbon everyone fears. The Japanese method is built entirely around one idea: never letting carbon cross that line. Every time an engine shuts down, a small amount of fuel residue is left behind on valves, piston crowns, and ringlands. That is unavoidable. Modern engines make this worse. Direct injection sprays fuel straight into the cylinder, so intake valves never get washed. Exhaust gas recirculation feeds soot back into the intake. Thin oils and low-tension rings reduce friction but increase blow-by. None of this is a defect. It is how modern engines are designed. The problem is not the design. The problem is how the engine is used afterward. Most driving outside Japan is hostile to combustion cleanliness. Short trips, cold starts, idling, stop-and-go traffic. Engines rarely reach stable operating temperature for long enough. Oil warms slowly. Combustion temperatures fluctuate. That environment is perfect for carbon to form, but terrible for removing it. Carbon does not burn at low temperatures. It just accumulates. Japanese mechanics understand something critical here. Oxidation occurs, but only within a specific temperature window and only when airflow and combustion are stable. Too cold and nothing happens. Too hot and you risk detonation, oil breakdown, or component stress. The entire Japanese method lives in that narrow middle ground. This is why aggressive Italian tune-ups fail. Brief, high RPM bursts raise temperature quickly, but not long enough. Carbon needs time at temperature, not spikes. Short blasts just heat the surface, then cool it again, which can actually harden deposits. Japanese drivers do the opposite. They hold the engine at moderate RPM for extended periods. Not redline, not lugging, just sustained controlled operation. That sustained mid-range RPM does several things at once. Combustion temperatures stabilize. Exhaust gas temperatures rise enough to promote oxidation. Airflow increases across valves and chambers. Oil pressure remains steady. There is no thermal shock. Over time, soft carbon slowly oxidizes away molecule by molecule. Nothing breaks loose. Nothing clogs passages. Nothing contaminates the oil suddenly. It is gradual, safe, and invisible. This is also why chemicals are unnecessary in this philosophy. Most chemical cleaners work by dissolving or loosening deposits. That can be effective, but it is uncontrolled. If deposits break free too quickly, they can lodge behind piston rings, clog oil pickup screens, or overload catalytic converters. Japanese mechanics avoid that risk entirely by letting combustion do the work it is naturally good at, as long as conditions are correct. Another overlooked factor is load. Japanese drivers do not just rev engines in neutral. The engine must be under light to moderate load. Load increases cylinder pressure slightly, raises combustion temperature, and improves oxidation efficiency. Free revving an engine accomplishes very little. Steady highway driving or long rural roads are ideal. This is why the method is often described as cleaning while driving, because that is exactly what it is. Fuel quality matters too, but not in the way people expect. Japanese mechanics do not rely on additives, but they do rely on consistency. Consistent octane. Consistent fuel source. Cleaner base fuel reduces new carbon formation while existing deposits are being burned off. Additives are not banned, but they are not the solution. Driving habits are. What surprises most people is how subtle the results feel at first. There is no dramatic transformation. The engine does not suddenly gain horsepower overnight. Instead, something else happens. It stops getting worse. Throttle response stops degrading. Idle stops getting rougher over time. Fuel economy stabilizes instead of slowly declining. Oil consumption plateaus. These are long-term changes, not instant gratification. This is why many drivers outside Japan think this method does not work. They try it once. They expect an immediate difference. They feel nothing dramatic and assume it is useless. Meanwhile, the engine is quietly cleaning itself, just not loudly enough to impress anyone. Japanese fleet operators understand this better than anyone. Taxi drivers, delivery services, commuter fleets, they track costs obsessively. If this method did not work, it would disappear instantly. Instead, it has become habit. Monthly sustained drives, full warm-ups. By the time most drivers start worrying about carbon buildup, the damage is already halfway. That is the part nobody likes to hear, but it explains why the Japanese method feels so different from everything you have been taught. This approach is not about fixing a problem after it shows up. It is about shaping how the engine lives every single week, so the problem never gets the chance to harden into something destructive. Once you understand that, the final pieces fall into place. Carbon does not disappear instantly. It oxidizes slowly. It needs sustained temperature, stable airflow, and time. That is why the Japanese method is built around repetition, not intensity. Short bursts of aggressive driving do not help. Revving the engine hard for a few minutes does not clean anything meaningful. All it does is spike heat briefly and then drop it again before oxidation can actually occur. Carbon does not respond to shock. It responds to consistency. This is why duration matters more than drama. Japanese mechanics and fleet operators aim for a steady window of operation, not a peak. The engine must be fully warmed, oil temperature stabilized, and then held at moderate RPM under light to moderate load for long enough that combustion heat stays elevated without stressing components. This is where carbon slowly loses its grip. Layer by layer, soft deposits burn away. Hardened deposits stop growing. Ring lands free up gradually instead of being flushed violently. Nothing breaks loose all at once. Nothing clogs passages. Nothing surprises the oil system. And that is also why frequency is non-negotiable. Most people hear about this method and treat it like a special event. They try it once, maybe twice, then forget about it. That misses the entire point. Carbon forms continuously. Every cold start, every short trip, every idle cycle adds a microscopic layer. Japanese drivers counter that by regularly reintroducing the conditions that reverse the process, not once a year, not when symptoms appear, as a habit. For daily driven vehicles, this typically means a sustained mid-RPM drive every few weeks. For low-mileage cars, it is often done monthly, especially before an oil change. Timing matters. When carbon oxidizes, the byproducts end up suspended in the oil. If you immediately run fresh oil afterward, you are flushing away the residue instead of circulating it for thousands of miles. That is why Japanese oil intervals tend to be shorter, even with high-quality oil. Clean oil is not an upgrade. It is part of the system. This also explains something most people misunderstand. It explains why engines maintained this way do not suddenly start consuming oil as mileage climbs. Carbon does not just sit on valves, it creeps behind piston rings. When it hardens there, the rings lose mobility. Oil control fails, compression drops. Chemical flushes can make this worse by washing debris into tight spaces. The Japanese method avoids that entirely. Carbon burns away gradually, particle by particle, leaving ringlands cleaner without ever overwhelming them. There are limits, and this matters. This method is not a rescue mission. It will not save an engine that is already knocking heavily, overheating, suffering from low oil pressure, or flashing a check engine light under load. Japanese mechanics are very clear about this. You do not apply controlled heat to a system that is already unstable. That is how you accelerate failure. The method works because it assumes the engine is fundamentally healthy. It preserves health. It does not restore it once it is gone. That distinction is why so many people misuse it and then dismiss it. Another mistake is impatience. Drivers expect immediate changes. They listen for instant quiet. They watch for dramatic fuel economy jumps after one drive. That is not how this works. The changes are subtle at first. A slightly smoother idle. A touch more responsive throttle. Less hesitation on cold mornings. Over months, not days, those small differences add up to an engine that simply does not degrade the way others do. This is also why the method feels invisible when it is working correctly. There is no clear before and after moment. There is just the absence of decline. And that absence is exactly what separates engines that feel tired at 120,000 miles from engines that still feel composed at 250,000 miles. One of the most revealing things about this approach is what happens when people stop doing it. Engines that were once smooth begin to slowly lose that sharpness again. Idle becomes a little rougher. Fuel economy drifts down. Throttle response dulls. Not catastrophically, just enough that drivers assume it is normal aging. It is not. It is simply the return of conditions that allow carbon to harden. Japanese engineers do not fight physics. They work with it. Carbon is not the enemy. Poor habits are. Short trips without compensation. Cold engines pushed too hard. Long stretches of low load driving without ever sustaining heat. These are the patterns that quietly shorten engine life. Change the pattern and carbon loses its advantage. That is why this method is not sold. It cannot be bottled. It cannot be upsold. It does not create dramatic repair bills or flashy services. It requires understanding, patience, and discipline. And those things do not fit well into most automotive business models. But engines do not care about business models. They care about temperature, airflow, and chemistry over time. If you take one thing away from this, let it be this. Engines do not fail suddenly. They drift. And drift is reversible if you intervene early and consistently. The Japanese carbon removal method works because it never lets drift become damage. If this has reframed how you think about carbon, habits, and engine longevity, stay with the channel. The next video breaks down another quiet practice that Japanese drivers use to protect engines long after most people assume wear is inevitable.